Hey guys, welcome to the Lunge and Lift podcast. Today we've got a bit of a clickbait title for you. We're going to talk about our top 3 internet overcorrections. I think in this day and age of social media, there's a lot of sensationalist messages getting out there, which makes it quite confusing to navigate what's actually true in the fitness industry. So we're going to go through our top 3 to get to the bottom of what the reality is behind these absolute statements. But before we get into it, as always, a quick thank you to our show sponsors, thetrainingstimulus.com. Please check out the website if you'd like to learn more about movement mechanics. Wit-fitness.com. Please use our discount code LL15 to get 15% off your Wit kit. And Hytro, use our discount code LL20 to get 20% off your blood flow restriction apparel. Right, let's get into it. But before we do, Big Rob, huge congratulations for smashing your recent powerlifting meet.
Thank you very much.
Please, could you enlighten the listeners as to what happened?
Well, I've had about 14 weeks ago, I decided to compete again right before I had my second child. I was like, right, this is a perfect opportunity to essentially double down on my training as much as I can with my current lifestyle and just see what I can do. Hired a coach, so I hired Tom Hamilton, and he basically, I wanted to take away the stress of programming and say, like, can you just program for me in the lead up to this competition? I was at 102 kilos at the time, and I had to decide, do I diet down a little bit to get under 100 and compete there, or do I just settle into the 100 to 110 kilo range and compete there and just feel as strong and big as possible? I decided the latter, so I weighed in on the day at 107.5, I think it was. So I was really happy with how it turned out, and training went pretty much to plan. I had 10 weeks of unreal training, hit some lifetime goals, PBs across the board. I hit my 280 kilo deadlift, which I failed in competition twice before that. It was great. And then I got a really bad cold, and I hit my lifetime squat. So I hit a 245 squat and a 165 bench on a Monday. Tuesday, I come down with this awful cold, and I didn't train again until the following Tuesday, I think it was. And even that, I struggled with. I was like, fuck, I've got a competition this weekend. Like, I can barely hit my numbers. No, I didn't train on Tuesday. I trained on Thursday. That was it. I trained 2 days out. And I was like, I don't know if this is a bit too much. And I did it. And I was really deflated because I was like, shit, like I was peaked. I was feeling so good. And I was like, and I said to myself, I feel I'm the type of individual that I'll show up on the day. Like, I might feel like shit and everything like that, but I know I've put in the work for the past, say 12 weeks. Like, I know I've deserved this. So I went in with a plan, and my plan was to lift as heavy as possible at the heaviest body weight I possibly could get to. That I didn't want to go above 110, and I did just that.
Awesome, mate. And take us through it. So, squat first. What was the opener, and how did it end up?
So that was actually really interesting. So probably over the last 12 years. Since I've started lifting, every single squat I've ever done, I've walked back out of a rack and squatted. And I found out halfway through my warm-ups that I couldn't step back, and I had to, basically it was a monolift. So what's holding the bar go out the way and you cannot move your feet. So to overcome that, I was like, God damn, this feels really weird, because as my stance is, I start narrow and I step back to my squat width. So I had to find what my squat width was without moving to it. And that really threw me off. But opened at 230, hit that pretty well. 240, hit that really well. And 250 was the goal of the day. So I went 250, even though I was kind of being egged on to do more. And I was like, no, I'm going to stick to my plan. So I did 250 and hit that. So I was over the moon with that. So 250 kilos.
PB.
Lifetime goal. That's all I've ever really wanted to lift. So lifetime PB, lifetime achieved. Awesome. So yeah,
amazing. And it's pretty quick as well, hey?
Yeah, it was exactly what I wanted, and from the lift, because my overarching goal was the deadlift of the day. Like, that was I wanted the 250 squat, but my goal was really the deadlift. So I was like, that's why I didn't want to grind out the squat, because I knew that little things, like little bits of fatigue, trickle over onto your bench and they trickle over into the deadlift later on. So yeah.
Brilliant. So bench next.
Bench was all right. It didn't go as well as I'd hoped in a way, but it kind of went as planned. I opened with 150, which was cool. Hit that completely fine. And then I went 160, which was all right. I hit 165 in training, as I said, like 2 weeks prior, and it was probably faster than the 160 I hit in competition. But at the same time, I was like, that was my second attempt, and I just left it there. I was like, I do not need another 2.5 or 5 kilos, and I could start to feel my left back spasm and like left lower back, and I was just like, I didn't need 5 kilos there. I needed more on the deadlift. So again, and what was quite cool, the commentator, like, because I'd asked to change my opener on my squat from 235 down to 230. He kind of played into that, and he's like, oh, here we go, the indecisive pansy kind of thing. You know, he can't make up his mind. Da, 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 da. I said, I asked to change one thing, and I appreciate it because you can't change it that close to your lift. But because the warm-up was not as planned, I kind of didn't get an opportunity to really get as close as possible. So I was like, if I open at 230, because my last warm-up was 210. So I was like, my 230 opener, and so she changed it for me. And then the whole time he was like, right, he's got to hit this because obviously he's aiming for the deadlift later on. He's kept like winding me up. Wow. I just found it quite funny. And then, so the bench 160, and I finished on the second attempt, and I was like, yeah, I'm cool there.
Good. Right. Main event.
Yeah.
The deadlift. How are you feeling going into it?
Feeling okay. Basically, this whole, like at the start of the day, the squats, the sheer pressure being built up in my head was really hurting. So like every time I braced, because of the cold, like every squat just hurt my head. And I got through it, and I was like, fine. Bench pressing wasn't actually too bad. But then as soon as I started deadlifting again, that pain come back. I was like, for fuck's sake. But anyway, warmed up, got up to 260, left it there. And I was like, right, okay. So I was going to open at 280, but I opened up at 282. So at least it was a PB. So opened up at 282, and it flew up. So I was over the moon with that. So I was like, cool, lifetime PB. And then the main event was for me to try for 300 kilos. And because that is, like, I remember when I hit 200 kilos for the first time, I said, like, then it was like, one day I'd love to deadlift 300 kilos. Like, obviously it was not I just didn't see that actually ever being a reality. Because I was just, the type of people I see lifting 300 kilos were like, either like geared up or like fucking powerlifters. Like, not someone that does everything. And, after the last competition where I bitched out at 280, I decided I wanted 2 attempts at 300 this time round, because in case I bitched out on the first one, I had a second attempt to give it my all. And it was really cool because I got to the bar, and obviously the commentator's like, here he is, this is what he's here for, da-da-da-da. You better lift it, da-da-da. All this pressure and stuff like that. So again, I was just embracing the fun. Got to the bar and like got the slack out and like dried myself in, and there's an ever so slight moment where I felt the weight basically want to go back down, and I was just like, no. I literally then used my head, just pulled my head backwards. I was like, nope, I'm not putting this down, and just continued. And obviously all of it's hook grip, so like my thumbs have never experienced that. The bar was quite sharp, and like it was what I've watched this deadlift back so many times. It's my lifetime goal. So I hit the 300, two white lights, one red light. The red light was for, she said she thought it was a soft lockout. I was like, no, yeah, if you want to give it that, fair enough. But you need 2 out of 3 to pass. I'm like, I got that lift. So I hit it, and I was fucking ecstatic. And I mean, like, my thumbs were like nearly cut up and stuff like that from the sharp. I was like, I didn't care. I was like, cracked open a beer straight away, had a beer. I was like, fuck yeah. I was over the moon. And so I took my 2 attempts there. I didn't need the third attempt because, again, I don't want more than 300. That was all I wanted. So what a day, and what a feeling to essentially complete powerlifting for me. Because that was my life. Like, I don't now have an urge to go for 350. Really, like a 310 deadlift means nothing to me. It's like those whole numbers. That was like it was with 200. It was 250, 300, 350, and I I don't want to put 350 kilos through my body. Same as a squat. I don't want to squat 300. Like I don't
Yeah.
have that drive.
Yeah, they're phenomenal numbers, mate. I'd love to know what percent, like what fraction of a percent of people have done that. That's
What
even
was
in the gym community, it's
Ah,
elite.
it was. I was buzzing because again, it's that kind of weight that not many people go to. Like that is like elite level numbers, and especially as a
Mm.
natural athlete as well, someone that isn't taking anything. Like
Mm.
most of the people there, it was an untested event. So again, you was only competing against yourself anyway. And like I was like, they used dots, which is like Wilks and Sinclair and stuff. So like power to weight ratio in a way.
Yeah,
And like I come ninth out of every lifter based on my body weight and the thing that included men and women. So that was really cool. And like for me to hit that, I'm now just like I will do that competition again next year.
oh
But
yeah,
yeah, and because again, I don't want to. I'm not now. Even though I've now essentially competed powerlifting in my mind, it's like what my next plan will be to do is do that same competition again, either lighter or doing high bar squats and sumo. So just a complete. I obviously do low bar and things. So just again a different stimulus. So
interesting.
just because again I don't 300. They're my cap numbers. I don't like the
Yeah,
stress on my body. That is all I wanted. So I mean it was buzzing. I'm still buzzing from it. Absolutely buzzing from it. And yeah, I'm now I officially deadlifted a polar bear. So
polar bear.
yeah,
Nice,
yeah.
nice. And is it 710? Is that the total?
710 kilos. Yeah.
That's
So
very good as well. Yeah.
absolutely buzzing. But what I actually thought, because when I was like thinking about today's episode and how this kind of all
Mm.
led into it, was my deadlift form has adapted just evolved over the years so much. And for some people, they might see my deadlift and be like, well, your upper back's rounding, you shouldn't be doing that, and like that's bad for your back and all this stuff. Yet I've just become the strongest and most powerful I've ever been. So who's right and who's wrong?
Yeah,
And I think with today's episode of like the overcorrections, imperfect form used to be like is extremely dangerous for you. So everyone had this idea of what a perfect deadlift should look like. But then you'll now notice that the complete opposite end of the spectrum coming involved, of now people saying, well, form doesn't matter at all. You can do what you want and just crack on. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. There's a little bit in between. And I thought that's a really nice place to kind of start today's episode.
yeah, spot on. So I think to give the episode a bit more context, I think, as we said in the intro, in the social media age, we're always looking for polarized opinions because they get the most views, clicks, likes, shares, comments, all that sort of stuff. And people get forced into these camps of having these absolutist views. And I think in the early days, the first one we're going to talk about is the old view in maybe like the 70s, 80s, 90s, was that imperfect form was really dangerous. And the new view that seems to get pushed a lot is that form doesn't matter at all. And we're going to dig into each of those points of view and discuss the pros and cons. And for the old view of imperfect form being dangerous, I think this goes back to the days of when you couldn't squat or lunge with your knee passing your toe. And now we have knees over toes guy saying almost the opposite, that the more your knee goes past your toe, the better. And there was also a point in time where you had to keep your spine neutral, and that any deviation from a flat back in any loaded movement was dangerous and not what the body is designed for. But now we have people promoting the opposite, trying to get your spine moving as much as possible, and promoting power generating movements with tons of spinal motion, and doing super heavy, like knees over toes guys as well, doing super heavy Jeffersons and stuff like that. And I think it's quite confusing for anybody who's not done a lot of research into either point of view as to what's actually best. And as you just were saying there, Rob, when we try to describe what perfect form is, even that is up for debate, because what does perfect mean to the individual? Does perfect mean the highest performing form, like the form that allows you to lift the most weight? Does perfect mean the safest form with the absolute lowest injury risk? Does perfect mean biomechanically most advantageous given your lever lengths and your strengths and weaknesses from a muscle balance point of view. None of this is ever clearly articulated or defined. So people end up arguing cross purposes, where you've got a powerlifter saying this is perfect form because this allows you to lift the most weight. Then you've got the rehab specialist who's like, no, this is perfect form because it minimizes risk. And then you've got the biomechanics specialist saying this is perfect form because it allows recruitment of the most muscle with the shortest lever lengths, or whatever it might be. So we're kind of fighting a losing battle from the start because we can't even agree on what perfect means. But I think your example there is perfect in that you've changed your style of deadlift and it's now resulted in your best ever performance. So for you and your goal of lifting 300 kilos, that was perfect and that is perfect. Yeah, what are your thoughts on it, mate?
For me, it's I since I've had my form evolve through watching other people's deadlifts and kind of trying to find my groove and my pattern. It's made me a lot more open-minded to looking at other people's deadlifts as well, and understanding that thing of what does perfect form look like. And I think a lot of this stuff kind of always boils down to the thing of what's the safest thing that they can do. So what's the chance of the least risk of injury to an individual, whether it's a client, a class, or even yourself. And it now, I think when I see people doing the like extremely heavy Jefferson curls as the example, like there, I kind of just I always then ask myself, like, how would that benefit me? Do I need to do a ridiculously heavy Jefferson's curl? I don't see the need for that at this moment. Does that mean I will never do that? No, it just means right now I don't see the need for it because I don't want to necessarily load my spine through that range at that type of loading. But is that necessarily incorrect? Well, that's up for debate. As you say, like, I think understanding what your goal is and what you want to get out of something is the most important bit. Do I think that my deadlift is potentially the best, like how I do my deadlift? Do I feel that's the best way to deadlift? Not necessarily, but it's the best way for me and my current body shape and weight and everything for me to lift the most amount of weight. Now, when I go and do Romanian deadlift, say, I don't deadlift like that at all. So I have a lot more of a neutral spine with my shoulders actually a little bit more retracted and depressed, and actually going into a little bit of extension in my hip. So I get more out of my hamstrings, and because I felt I get the most out of that. But I've been able to kind of find my form within the current thing. And I think when it comes to this is, if you stick too much to the polarizing opposites, as you say, it's so easy to get confused as what's the right thing to do. And it's very hard for most people to actually take that intrinsic look and say, what am I getting out of this?
Yeah, spot on. I think it's essentially people just extrapolating logic beyond reasonable means. So if you say, you should focus on form and it's dangerous to go outside of perfect form, that means that people take it to the extreme version of that, in that anything away from perfect. So the classic overactive PT is just like constantly correcting somebody's squat because their knee's gone half a millimeter beyond their toe, or their spine flexes ever so slightly. That's now being completely demonized. And then the pendulum swings the other way and people think we should be as strong as possible in as weird a shape as possible. So we do super heavy Jefferson curls, we do all these strange more unusual movements to train in as, like Ido Patel is a good example of this, in that something he says, which I do agree with to an extent, is that there are no bad movements. So all of our joints were made to move in all three planes of motion, and the movements that they permit give us clues as to what the body likes. And my stance on it is essentially that you can get used to anything if you go slow enough, but whether people actually go slow enough is the limiting thing. So Ido Patel will train walking on the outside edge of his ankles, so he could jump and land in basically the perfect ankle sprain position, and he's developed a huge amount of tissue tolerance so that he won't damage his ligaments. But barely anybody else does that. So unless they've had graded and progressed exposure to those positions, there is a huge amount of risk to go into them with speed and force. So in a perfect world, we'd all have all the time in the world to condition all of our joints in all of their positions and progressively overload them, so we're incredibly strong through our connective tissue against any random movement that might happen in sport or life. But that's not realistic. So when you've got these two polarizing points of view of like, don't get it wrong at all or do everything weird and extreme, that doesn't leave much room for nuance and, like you said, your individual circumstance. So as always, you need to get clear on what you're trying to get out of your training and then make your decision where on that scale do you build in the movement variation around your form. Because if you're just, a grandparent trying to keep moving and play with your grandkids, it's a very different situation compared to if you're trying to deadlift 300 kilos or you're trying to run an ultra marathon. So I think the probably overarching theme for this episode is going to be getting clear on what you want out of it and then applying some nuance to choose your level as to what's appropriate for you, where you are today and where you want to go.
When I think about this, if I want to bring it back closer to home, I think you could be part of the way up there into the polar opposite of your silly lunges if you don't understand. And for me, it's like, I remember when you first started putting out like silly lunges, people like that look of like, what on earth are you doing? That's why it was why the funny name of silly lunges, because it's like, if you don't have context behind the lunge and you just think, okay, this is what I have to lunge like, because I need to be doing exactly what Ash says because Ash says this is what you need to do. It's like, but why are you lunging? What is the purpose of your lunging? And I think I loved it because like your class of calling it silly lunges made me think, okay, cool. Let me think outside of my current box, my one-dimensional box or two-dimensional box, forward and backwards, maybe side to side at the most. And actually, why are you doing silly lunges? What is the purpose and what are you trying to find and what are you trying to get from them? And it draws attention, and that's the thing. And I think that it's hard because I think most people's messages are not malicious in any nature. It's like they're trying to bring attention in a very, like, in an attention demanding world where everyone's trying to get that attention. If you're not polarizing, it's really hard to be heard. So, but then what your silly lunge has done for me is when I see you do them, I'm like, okay, cool. What does this mean? Like, why that? But most people, if they don't have that first question themselves, what does this mean? Is in like, that's wrong. You shouldn't be doing that. You say like, well, no. Now you're just setting up camp on the other side. It's like, maybe ask them questions. Why? Why are they called silly lunges? Ash, why were they called silly lunges?
The story behind that one is that I think a couple of my clients were training in a gym that didn't know each other at the same time, both doing their weird lunges. And then one of them came over to the other and was like, are you part of Ash's silly lunge club? And then it just sort of stuck from that point.
I love it.
So yeah, that's the origin story there. But I think I love the way you've articulated that. And it relates back to your RDL example in that your setup for your RDL is different to your setup for your conventional deadlift because the training stimulus you're trying to get is different. So when you're doing your RDL, you're presumably trying to get much more of a hamstring bias. So going into a more extended spine is going to lengthen the hamstring more. So you're getting that stimulus out of the exercise, whereas you might be able to lift more. You might say it's not an RDL anymore if you bend the knee a bit more and flex the spine a little bit more. In fact, you almost definitely would because you're recruiting more other muscle groups, but that's not the purpose behind the exercise. And this is the same for the silly lunges. Like, why would you do a lunge in a silly fashion or an unusual fashion? Because you have a desired training stimulus to emphasize one muscle or muscle group or one type of motor pattern more than in a conventional lunge. So this notion of form, again, is completely context and goal dependent. So whether imperfect form is dangerous or form doesn't matter at all, neither is absolutely true in 100% of circumstances. It always needs to be viewed in the context with which the exercise is being applied.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of finish that one there because I think we kind of done that. But I then also had just a quick thought there because I started doing a lot more looking into some old school strength methods and like some of the ways people used to lift, like back in like the 20s and 30s and stuff like that, and there was so much more just letting their body move around the weight rather than trying to be like, there was less like it needs to be like this. It was like, all right, get the weight from A to B in how you see the best way fit to do that. It was
Yep.
a much simpler time. And so I started reading this book called Super Strength by Andy Cavill. I think Andy Cavill or something like that. Anyway, he was the owner. He designed the company, the Milo barbell over in America. Like, so one of the first like strength like barbells essentially. It was like one of those ones where you like the like cannonballs at the end, so like proper old school barbell, right? And so he's got a whole book on like strength and like a lot of these like what that people might class like circus lifts and stuff like that. So like silly lifting essentially. And a lot of it is boiling down to like they were just trying to get the most efficient path up for them of getting the weight there, and weren't saying you need to have your spine looking like this, your knees like this. It was like just move. And I think
Yep.
that's where I think if we find that middle ground of, okay, understanding what some principles are of what we think is safe, and
Yep.
understanding that, okay, maybe not to be too worried if we go outside of that safety blanket, that if we feel good doing something and we're using the appropriate loading to do something, that we're getting the correct stimulus. And it was just an interesting thought, because I feel when you mentioned about how the safety thing, I'd say that safety thing's probably come even more like to 2010. I'd say like, I think having to move, and it's like, I think Kelly Starrett with the squat, like the
Yeah.
knees out type thing, had to be like this because this is the perfect form. And it's like, that's only really probably, this is about like 2015, I'd say, maybe start to then maybe eke
Yeah.
into. So it's crazy. But then because of now social media and how the opposite side is so exposed now, it feels like that's all, okay, you have got those polarizing, because that's all we hear on social media. So anyway.
Yeah. Spot on, mate.
Yeah. So second one, I really love this, of sport. The old view of sport specificity is king, and then the new view of GPP, so general physical preparedness, is best, and general qualities are what you should be training outside of your sport. This is cool because the amount of, again, we look at social media, the amount of people that like to bash on very sport specific things because it looks ridiculous in a gym based setting. It can be memes. And it's like, like Paul Lima's a great one when he's done things of like taking a piss out of like people doing like banded runs or something like that. And he's having fun with it. But that's what it is. He's having fun with the sport specificity. But then when you then take it into maybe a bit more of a serious context where people are now saying, you don't need to be doing that sport specific stuff because you need to just be doing everything in here. So like, I know what your thoughts are anyway, but let's talk. let's dive a bit deeper into this.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the history was probably in the early days of functional training. People started doing things that were not bodybuilding or not classic strength movements. And, you
Pull
stand
check
on a
times.
Yeah, when
Yeah,
pull check started getting big, and it's when
Bosu
what's his name,
balls.
David Weck, invented the Bosu ball, which he got a lot of flack for, because if you're standing on an unstable surface, everything's immediately more functional and more relevant to sport. And yeah, there are lots of sort of crazy functional things come into prevalence, and you see boxers doing battle ropes and all this sort of shit. And I think, as with all of these arguments, there's an element of truth both sides of the fence. But the problem with the sports specificity movement was that it just, like everything, got extrapolated to an extreme, so that people would look down on the basic movements and say that classic strength and conditioning was totally shit, and using a barbell has no place in sport because unless you're a powerlifter or a weightlifter, that's not the way that your body moves. And I think whenever somebody has that complete extreme point of view, you need to just scratch the surface to see why they might hold that point of view. And generally, it's because they're selling something on the other point of view. So they're trying to bash on the opposite to promote their own with one layer of indirection. And so now we have the counter movement back the other way. And I think with CrossFit making the idea of general physical preparedness more mainstream and more popular, everyone's like, it's better to be a generalist. You should be able to do all sorts of things. And that's now got extrapolated to an extreme where sports specificity is the devil, and we shouldn't be doing anything that doesn't train general movement qualities in the gym. So you have a lot of people now saying that train general movement qualities in the gym and then do your sport outside of the gym. And there's a post I'm planning at some point, which is that specificity is non-binary. It's not specific or non-specific. And at the Training Stimulus, we have a concept called the spectrum of specificity, because you can grade specificity. And it's glaringly obvious when you think about it, but I don't think many people think about it enough, that for any given goal or any given movement outcome, there are things that are more and less specific. So obvious ones would be a front squat is more specific to a clean than a back squat, because it's the bar is held in the same position. But when you apply it to other sports like golf, rotation is useful in golf. So you could do a seated Russian twist, or you could do a standing Russian twist. In golf, you're stood up. So a standing Russian twist probably has a little bit more carryover. If you could mimic the swing of a golf club even more, so rather than just twisting at an even level, mimicking the side bend and the follow through, then it would be even more specific. So it becomes really apparent that there are better and worse choices for gym-based movements for a given sport. So the idea that it's totally one or totally the other, that you can be doing your pure sports training, or you can be doing general gymming, strength and conditioning in the gym, I think with the very smallest investigation just doesn't hold up. And I get it in that if you're training general population people who just want to be generally fitter and stronger, there are some broad brush recommendations for the types of movements that you should be getting fitter and stronger in. But even within that general population, there's degrees of specificity as to what people want to use their body for. If you're an old age pensioner who wants to continue being able to use the stairs unassisted, there are more or less specific movements, like a step up might actually be more beneficial than a lunge even. But if you're a general population person who wants to play five-a-side football on the weekends, then maybe some faster change of direction stuff and plyometric stuff is more specific to you, even though you're doing a general physical preparedness program. So I just take issue with the idea that the gym is a sacred space that only general qualities should be trained, when actually, regardless of your level of sport, you can make things more or less specific with great benefit.
Love that, because when I think of that statement, I think of you training at WIT, doing your own thing. Like when you see everyone else moving the barbells, doing like, okay, cool, we're doing like, when I'm talking about back in the day, we're doing say CrossFit specific workout, stuff like that. And then there's you doing like your archer pull-ups or like one arm pull-ups, all these goal specific things. So you're using like gym based movements to do say like outside of the gym exercises. And when it got me thinking about one of the bits of kit that I really liked from back in the day, you know, the TRX rip trainer.
The rip, I know the TRX, I don't know the rip trainer.
Mate, I think you'd love it, because basically it's essentially a stick with a bungee cord. So essentially, if you imagine, when you're saying about golf, as how close to that, it's a golf. So you go against resistance with the band, and then obviously be pulling you back. So that rotational resistance, so that sport specificity, and it then become. I found when that bit of kit come out. So I think this was like back in like 2010, 2012 time, and like, people were using like, okay, then we're doing like presses with it, because they're thinking about, okay, it's the anti-rotation. So everything was, you can do everything with this bit of kit. And it's like, how about keep it for the purpose that it could probably be used for, rather than trying to do everything with it. And I think that was the same thing with the Bosu ball. When the guy invented it, it got basically taken out of context. And then it was just absolutely like, nope, go and collect dust in the corner, because it's absolutely pointless having. And I think when it comes to like that sport specificity, it's, if we're trying to go so far against it where we just want to be in a gym because that's where most of our training is, then yeah, we probably don't need any of those sports specific movements because we're not doing any sports outside of the gym. So everything we need to be good at is based in here. But now, if you look at some of the the CrossFit foundational things, I can't remember what they're called, but you know those 12
Key
tenets
physical
of,
skills.
yeah,
10
yeah,
key
10,
physical skills.
10 key physical skills, and like throwing, playing, like those sort of things. I can't remember them all now off the top of my head, but it was a long time ago since I did that. But the idea was it was outside of the gym as well.
Yeah.
And then it's like they focused on all the ones that based are in the gym, like in those four walls. But you look at CrossFit athletes, as soon as they get close to the games season, you notice all their training starts to become a lot more, say, well-rounded, like, strongman-esque, like sport-esque, sprints-esque, like doing all these things that you don't do in the gym because they know the test of fitness is going to be beyond just the barbell. Yet in the gym, that's what the test of fitness is. It's really funny that when you go to the elite levels, that then it becomes actually not well. Obviously, they use the barbells and stuff like that, but it changes completely.
Yeah, completely. And I think this is why I take issue with it, in that a lot, or I'd say the vast majority of general physical preparedness programs do not prepare you for life outside of the gym. And I've seen it time and time again. Obviously got a biased perspective because a lot of people come to me when they're injured, but they can be incredibly fit and strong in the gym, and then they'll go and play tennis and injure their shoulder. They'll go and play football, they tear their ACL. If you were physically prepared for what you were going to use your body for, you wouldn't have any issues with that. But the reality is that if you know what you want to condition your body for, why don't you just condition it directly for that? Why don't you take the direct path from A to B rather than hoping that your general program happens to tick the right boxes? If you know what those boxes are, just directly tick them, because we've only got so much time, we've only got so much recovery. So if we have a clear direction that we need to go, we know we need to be resilient against five-a-side football, then do some stuff that makes you resilient for five-a-side football. It's as simple as that. But I think people who sell generic programs want to discourage people from that point of view, because they're trying to sell a generic program to say, look, like a generic program makes you ready for anything. It'll make you ready for a lot more things and a wider spectrum of things than a very specific program like a powerlifting program, but it doesn't mean it actually makes you ready for absolutely everything, because at the end of the day, we've only got so much time to train. So let's try and squeeze as much value out of it as possible.
Yeah, because then you then start thinking that, because what looks good on social media, because fitness on social media is sprints on interval on ergs, like heavy lifts, like barbell cycling, doing these like gymnastic work, like doing all these. That looks to most people from the outside looking in as, oh, they're fit, and a lot of the time there's a lot of people in good shape doing that. So it's like, that must be fitness. But then, as you say, then it's like, don't go and do a generalized program to improve your 5K and say, this generalized program is going to make me stronger at a 5K. And it's like, you'll do one and then you'll do another one and you might improve slightly. Go, look, it's CrossFit. But then you do a third one and see if you get actually better, say, in the same amount of time later, and notice if it was just you got better at understanding what the 5K was. And like, it's really interesting, because I think this kind of also relates slightly to the point above, and how like we then start thinking about movements outside of the normal conventional lifts to start taking our joints to these end range to expose us to things, thinking, right, okay, now that fact I've got some deep knee flexion, it's going to make me really good at, say, sports, because if my knee goes there, well no, because you're doing it in a slow eccentric loading pattern, not a fast, say, contraction. And do you know what I mean? It's like, it's really interesting how all these points link together, but and it all stems back to really social media and what gets attraction and what gets attention.
Yeah, exactly. The polarization clearly is the problem, I think, and the because of the fast nature of social media, people don't have the time or the inclination to read a long post. So you're trying to grab attention as quickly as possible with controversial or pointed statements, which are the things that do grab the most attention and will make people hover on your post or read the comments. And that's unfortunately why you get these massive overcorrections. And I think it's just the way it is nowadays. We've got to kind of figure out how we navigate that as an individual. But I think you made a really good point about the CrossFit thing that reminded me of a conversation I had with a client who I think did a marathon, got some knee pain, started doing CrossFit, did another marathon, didn't have knee pain. And their interpretation of that was like, CrossFit works. And I was like, yeah,
Brilliant.
doing some strength and conditioning compared to no strength and conditioning, you're much more likely to get through a marathon unscathed. But the thing I didn't say, because I didn't want to burst their bubble, was had you done just a run specific strength and conditioning program, you probably would have got even better results, because you know the goal is running a marathon. Sure, you wouldn't have been able to snatch as much as you could doing a CrossFit program. Maybe that's important to you, so that's worth it. But it's not that CrossFit was the thing. It's because CrossFit happened to contain enough of the elements that made your body more resilient for a marathon. But had you done just a pure strength and conditioning program for running, you might have got even better marathon results. You might have run it faster and also been pain-free. So I think just that logical linkage of like inputs versus outputs, we need to just question them a little bit more to say, just because there's been a little bit of correlation between doing a general program and a favorable outcome, it doesn't mean that's the best. And if we know where we're trying to end up, that then obviously a more direct training program for that end goal will be better than a general one trying to cover a broad spectrum of things that maybe we don't care about.
Yeah, it's like essentially if I wanted to say, cool, I'm going to do powerlifting to get stronger, but I want to get stronger at my weightlifting movements of clean and snatch. It's like, okay, I'll probably get stronger and I'll probably be able to handle more load, but I could have got even better by learning the skill of the movement and not just going through sheer muscle rather than the technical application of it. So I think this leads into our last point quite nicely as well, because the old view of if you don't have a strict program, you won't get results. And you compare that to the new view of fun and adherence are the most important thing. And when I look at this, I think it's quite good, because weightlifters, and I'd say powerlifters, are very good at doing the same shit week in, week out to get better at the 3 lifts or the 2 lifts. Like, and say sports individuals that know they're doing, say football, whatever, they're doing exactly what it is. But then when we got the rest of the population, and even bodybuilders, like they know bodybuilders, like everyone does it. But when you got now this the GPP field of basically CrossFitters, essentially, which is, I'm all for, and the functional fitness and the notion of doing the same thing for 4 weeks, say, as a minimum, seems blasphemy. Like, you're telling me I've got to do the same thing for 4 weeks. It's like, well, yeah, the first week you're getting to learn it. Second one, you might be a bit better. Week 3 and 4, you might actually start executing it better. Just imagine if you do it for another 4 weeks. It's like, fuck yeah, I'll actually get 4 weeks of solid gains. But it's like, no, we need to do something different because of boredom. Again, that attention. I need to stimulate you through variety rather than through new stimulation of better muscle recruitment, better feeling of the movements.
Yeah, just getting good at something, right?
Yeah.
Like, getting good at anything requires repetition, practice. And it reminds me of an episode we did with Steve Fawcett when he was talking about some testing they did on the JST program, where I think they had a long squat cycle. I can't remember how long it was, whether it was 12 or 16 weeks.
I thought it was 20 weeks. I thought it was a big one, yeah. I'm not sure.
Awesome. Love that. But basically, they had the best improvements in squat PBs they'd ever had. PBs were just raining in from everywhere. Everyone added huge numbers of kilos to their lifts. But the feedback was that it was boring and that they would rather have more varied programs. And that's absolutely fine. There's totally legitimate wants from the customers at the end of the day. But I think the pendulum swinging the other way, the overcorrection here is that a lot of people are now saying that the variety and fun and adherence are more important. And it's such an arbitrary statement of more important. Like, it can't be all encompassing, because we know the body adapts through progressive overload, and we know the more you do something, the better you get at it. So in terms of effectiveness, we know the consistent, strict program trumps the varied and random one, assuming equal adherence. But that equal adherence is something that we can't quantify very legitimately. If you did a huge study comparing different programs and how well people stuck to them, then maybe we could get some data on it. But the reality is it's very individual. And I've had clients on both ends of the spectrum, ones that love repeating stuff. They love doing 10 by 500 meters on the row with a minute's rest because there's nowhere to hide and they have to push themselves to their absolute limit to keep getting better. But they know without a shadow of a doubt that they are fitter. For somebody else, the idea of that consistent accountability and repetition is terrifying because they don't like that and they would rather do something different. And for that person, if there's an inflection point where it means they go to the gym less, they apply themselves less, then they might get worse results. But that's because of their adherence problem, not because of something else. So in that situation, you have a business case to say more variety, more fun is important to keep them consistent. So they're on a less perfect program, but they're getting better results because they enjoy it more. But I think respecting people as individuals to know what their requirement for variety and fun are to maximize overall results is the discussion. It's not that either end of the spectrum is right or wrong. It's very much a nuanced conversation because equally you get other people who, if you say they've got to do the same 3 or 4 workouts every week, they'll just fall off the program and start jumping into classes because it's not enjoyable. So for that person, then a random program that they do 4 times a week is going to get them much better results. So, but it's just the absolutist nature of these statements that's just such a load of bollocks.
Brilliant. I know it is. And the thing is, it's like, I fully understand the fun and adherence side of things because at the end of the day, I think if you are attending the gym and doing something, that's better than you sitting on the couch doing fuck all. Like, you moving the needle forward in whatever aspect of your life you choose to, that's surely got to be better than just being completely static. However, I think the issue comes when if you have specific goals, like what we've spoken about this whole episode really, and it's like if you've got some specific goals, you're going to have to understand that a strict program will get you there quicker, and then the variety, the fun, the adherence should be that I'm getting better. Like I think using like the front squat as an example, like if you did the front squat, say for 4 weeks, and then you went to back squat, safety bar squat, goblet squat, you did all these other squats and then revisited front squat maybe in 12 weeks time, the front rack is something that you need to keep exposing yourself to, getting that bar in that position because it won't feel comfortable most of the time. So if you're leaving it 12 weeks in between front squat cycles, it's too long for you to get good. I remember when front squats felt absolutely amazing, and it was because I was basically doing weightlifting and front squats and back squats every week, and I did it for like multiple weeks, and I felt amazing in front squats just because I could get into a great front rack because my body had adapted. And the variation come from, it was maybe different reps, different rests, different like that, but maybe some pauses, but I was still doing front squats and it was following structure. But then outside of, say, I had some structured lifts was then where the variety come in. So that was where I might be able to add in, say, an arm exercise of my choice, a vertical pulling exercise of my choice. So that's where, like, for me, with, say, my online programming, it's like I have some like key fundamentals I want people to do. And then when I get to maybe some of the fluff work, I give them choice and then let's stick with that option for a couple of weeks. So you choose between what lat pull down variation you want to do. And we nail that for 4 weeks and go to the next thing, because at the end of the day, I just want a vertical pull. That's what I want from their training. So then they get that thing of adherence because they chose it. So they feel good that they've done that. And then it's also, they feel part of the program. So they're bought in. And if you buy into something, that's when you adhere to it, because you're buying into the program and you're buying into the process rather than just achieving X weight on the bar or achieving whatever physique at the end.
Yeah, spot on. I think that's a really nice way to solve. Basically, it's the balance between consistent enough to make progress and varied enough to stay enjoyable. But even within that vertical pull, there's consistency. Like they are always doing a vertical pull. So it's almost like a nice way to trick them into feeling like they've got more variety than they really do, which is good. And I think my summary is that everyone has a balance that they like between consistent and varied. And you get it both ways in that I've had people who I'd start programming for them and they would say, oh yeah, but I want to continue doing 3 or 4 classes a week to spend time with my friends. And then a few months later, they're like, okay, but I don't feel like I'm making as much progress as I want in these things. It's like, well, you're only giving me like 1 or 2 sessions a week to
Brilliant.
try and work towards and counteract what you're doing in the class. And then slowly, as they start doing more and more structured, programmed, repeated or similar sessions, they see the progress. And then eventually they don't want to do, not bashing on classes, but for the purpose of pure performance improvement, doing a bespoke program for you as an individual is obviously going to trump a class. So there are those people that fall into that camp, and then you get people on the other side of the spectrum as well who they're not that bothered about making extreme performance. So for them, focusing much more on the fun side of things and going to classes and variety is actually going to work for them better overall. But I think the inescapable truth is that if performance and results are your absolute priority, the structure and progression in a structured program does work better. This is the reason why elite performers do that. Like, you look at runners and their programs, they're fucking boring. They do the same, they're just trying to slowly increment the same volume, so slowly increase the total running volume, and they'll have a handful of different interval sessions that they're working on depending on the distance that they compete in, and they're just always trying to make those better. And then they'll have some structured strength and conditioning to work on whatever's limiting their performance, but they're not trying to work on their snatch. They're not trying to do this crazy box jump variation they saw on Instagram, because they know what they're trying to get towards, so they go directly for it. However, that's not everyone. I'm aware that's a very small percentage of the population, but as always, bringing awareness to the decision point of like, right, this is how serious I am about my training. I'm not that bothered about getting beaten in the open, so I'm just going to do whatever floats my boat on any particular day, and that's totally fine. But I think it's incorrect and slightly disingenuous to tell people that variety is more important than structure when we know the progressive overload is the key to progressing in any sort of fitness.
Yeah, I think when I think back to like my triathlon days, like they were same bike sessions, same run sessions, and even the most recent, my powerlifting prep, every Monday I did squat and bench. Every Tuesday was pause deadlifts. Every Thursday was squat and bench, but then at a lot of different, like either like pause squat and say pause bench or whatever. It was like a variation, but it's still the movements. And then Friday was deadlift. So every week I trained 4 times a week, and they were the lifts, varying percentages and everything. And then everything below that, I think over the 12 weeks, I maybe had every 4 weeks, the next lot of exercises slightly changed, maybe, but the principles were still the same. And that was a thing. And I think it was nice to have that structure, because I knew what I had to achieve in that session, because I had the goal of a meet at the end of it. Whereas if that was all I was doing, if that was me doing that now, I don't want that kind of structure, because I like variety and having some foundations that I focus on. So basically using that, say Monday and Friday on that program would be the things that I'd keep. Squat and bench, set things, and deadlift. Everything else is free for all for say 4 to 8 weeks. And then I progress on it, and then I move on. And that's, for me, I want to make sure I maintain some basics and make sure that I can progress those, because I understand the importance of progressive overload and stuff. And then I want my adherence thing, because at the end of the day, I don't care too much about training. I want to have fun with it. And that's what training is to me. It's about having fun, seeing what my body can handle, because I like to do different things.
Exactly. So the goal has shifted from peak performance in a powerlifting meet to more enjoyment and more variety. So your program is going to reflect that. But you've proved the point in that you've had a really well structured progressive program, and it's resulted in the best performance you've ever had in powerlifting. Had you done random strength classes here, there, and like changing what days you do, what lifts, and all that unstructured randomness, I don't think anybody could reasonably argue that you would have had a better performance in your powerlifting meet.
No, and this is also the thing. It's like, this is where I think having that structure really helped me. Is the day I PB'd my deadlift with 280 kilos, I went in feeling like absolute shit. I had like severe discomfort in my rib cage, basically my intercostals felt bruised. So trying to brace, on the day before when I squatted, the bar felt like my spine was collapsing underneath it. I felt terrible. Went into that deadlift session and I was saying to the guys before I was lifting, I was like, oh, fuck, I've got to somehow like get up to, and it was an RPE 8.5. So I knew it was going to be something heavy. I didn't know the number I was going to hit. I just knew it was going to be heavy and heavier than last week. And I was just like, fuck, like, how am I going to do this? And anyway, getting into it, warming up, the body feels good, and bang, PB. Exactly. And this is the thing, because I knew all I had to do was achieve that task, because I had the structure of the program and it was progressing on from last week and the week before that. I knew what to aim for number wise, roughly. So I was just like, here we go. Like, it was a clear, defined goal for me to achieve. And I achieved it because I had all the previous weeks that I'd been building up to that moment. And that wasn't even a penultimate, that was a penultimate moment, not even the end. So
exactly. That is perfect progressive overload, right? You'd laid foundations. I remember speaking to you, it was on a Friday, wasn't it? And you were saying that. I was like, yeah, but you're peaking. Like, this is kind of how it's meant to be. You're in a groove and numbers are getting heavier. You feel pretty stressed, but because it's a consistent stimulus, every Friday you deadlift heavy, your body kind of knows it's coming and it's then able to pump out the strength. Whereas had there been loads of other random workouts thrown in, excuse me, stealing your energy, it's much less likely that you're going to make such quick, significant strength gain.
Well, my past two preps were prime examples. The first prep, I built a kitchen. Second prep, I built a home gym. So much, so don't get me wrong, training was then maybe twice a week at the most. Where I was still really happy with those performances because they were fucking great for training as I was. But I had so much extra stress on the body. Whereas this one, it was just the training, following a strict program to some degree, and achieving at the end. And it's funny, there's obviously this episode's got a nice full circle, coming back to all about me again. And, but it's I think it is a very clear example of what all of this stuff. So again, from having some specificity in my training, having like my type of form that I found best for me, and then having a strict program with some like room for wiggle, has given me my best performance possible in my training endeavor, which is basically the middle ground of all of these points tailored to me. So now take these points on for you guys that are listening and say, okay, cool. Like, where do I fall in the camp? What am I currently working towards? What do I want to achieve? And what do I feel is the best possible route for me to get there? And if you don't know, talk to Ash, talk to myself, message us on Instagram, head over to our Lunge and Lift Instagram at lunge.lift, or us personally, ask us a question, get some more out of it, because we understand that there is a lot of nuance behind a lot of this stuff. And it is a very, it's a fucking mind fuck with all the shit that's out there. So you have to distill it all can be quite challenging. So sometimes getting, talking to someone that's maybe a bit more in the thick of it can kind of help you get some clarity on the direction you kind of need for your training. But I think, anything else you want to
add? I think I just wrote a few takeaways down. So there's probably going to be a lot of duplication, but it's worth rattling them out. I think the key one I want everyone to come away with is that dogma is dangerous. So we're always looking for simple rules, and they are useful as guidelines. But in this digital age, I think oversimplification can eventually just become a lie. When you take it to an extreme, it's just completely false compared to reality. And to get full understanding of how something works or whether it's right for you, we need to be interested in nuance. And we can't just have these slapdash rules of this is always good, this is always bad for all people at all times. So once you know what your priorities are, know where the inflection point is for your individual decision. So if we're looking at form, say for Rob's upper back rounding, how much upper back rounding is too much upper back rounding? Like, when does that's essentially the decision point that you're making. It's not perfect form is the only acceptable thing, or form doesn't matter. There is a shade of grey that's the right Goldilocks amount. So when you're picking your priorities, that should help you pick that balance point. Same goes with the structured programs, in that there's an ideal level of structure that suits most individuals. Totally unstructured is one end of the spectrum and random every day, and then like super anal and prescribed down to the individual rep, weight, rest period on every single exercise, and is the other end. So everyone falls somewhere on that spectrum. So pick your personal balance, or pick your client's personal balance, and don't feel like it's absolutely one way or the other. And I think, basically it's just about sense checking when somebody writes a sensationalizing tweet or Instagram post. If they're trying to polarize people, just examine the intentions behind it. Are they selling something? If they're selling something, then you probably need to take their point of view with a pinch of salt. And everyone's guilty of it. Like, I think anybody who runs a business is obviously trying to promote their products, but when you are interpreting it as an individual and whether their message is right for you, it's like GCSE history. You've got to examine the biases and evaluate the sources for integrity. And ultimately, at the end of the day, just check back. Are you getting what you want out of any of these things? Is your form getting you what you want? Are you getting stronger and not getting injured? Is your program getting you want? Are you getting the results? Are you getting the enjoyment? Are things trending in the right direction? If they are, then maybe you don't need to change anything. But if they're not, say you're not getting the results you wanted from your training and there's loads of random fluff in there, then maybe you need to have an examination to see whether there's things you could tweak to be better.
Beautiful, mate. Beautiful. So, guys, we hope you enjoyed today's episode. I thoroughly enjoyed that. As always, if you did enjoy it, we'd love for you to share it on those social media platforms that we were smashing against. We'd appreciate it. It helps us grow. And as always, if you do want to support the podcast, you can head over to YouTube and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And just share the message. It's really all we can ask for. So thank you very much as always for listening. We really appreciate you every single week, and we will see you next week.
Thanks, guys.